SA Decides 2019. It is fantastic having you here with us on the SABC as we really do start to round up, not really round up, but take very serious looks at the results that have come through, because there honestly have been a lot of votes captured overnight. And as we sit right now, we're heading up to 76% of the votes that have been counted. And we've been doing a lot of predictions. We want to continue to do that. We're working in conjunction with the CSIR. And I think at this point, we can actually start breaking it down into the race for seats according to the CSIR predictions. We're about to cross over to the Eastern Cape. So let's put up the Eastern Cape legislature just to give you a look at the predictions. So 91% of the voting districts have already been counted, and the turnout there looking at 60%. In fact, I did see a prediction from the CSIR that the overall turnout for the national elections would be at about 60%. But here's that interesting look at the seats in the Eastern Cape legislature. There are 63 seats up for grabs. At this point, it is predicted that the ANC will have 44 of them with 69.8% of the vote. The DA will have 10 seats with 15.9% of the votes, and the EFF will have 5 seats at 7.9%. The UDM 2 and the ATM 1 seat. So they did manage, if in fact these predictions are right to go by, to get a seat in the Eastern Cape legislature. But for more on the ground, we've got Lorato Tipa. She's standing by in Port Elizabeth. So, Lorato, we've spoken through a picture of what's happening there with regard to some of the predictions from CSIR. But I can imagine from what you're seeing now, this is not so much a prediction. This is turning into a reality. Good morning to you.
A definite reality, and you remember that the Eastern Cape for a long time has been a stronghold of the ANC, and the general sense that we get from the people on the ground is that the ANC is going back to its former glory. It's produced former presidents like former late President Nelson Mandela, former President Thabo Mbeki or Tambo. So the general sense you're getting now is that people are saying the ANC again has rekindled hope. The new dawn by Cyril Ramaphosa, the ANC president, has really reignited the hope, and people are saying that, you know what, for the first time again, we can perhaps find hope in the ANC. But to unpack exactly how things stand in this province and where the ANC is and the other opposition parties, I'm joined by political analyst Mr. Ongama Mtimka. Let's first talk about the ANC. I think a very obvious win. Even the chairperson, Oscar Mabuyane, was saying that an obvious win for them. But when we zoom into the metros, you'll see that perhaps in some metros they won by a large margin. In certain metros they lost, such as the Gokha. Does this mean that the ANC now is still a rural party as measured as the rural areas, or is the metros also now people finding hope in the ANC again?
So the ANC is doing well in the Eastern Cape. It's a stronghold. In fact, in 2016, when it was threatened elsewhere in the country, the expectation was that it was going to hold in the Eastern Cape, and it did. So you're right about the fluidity of the vote in the metros, and in fact the one major metro in Nelson Mandela Bay, where it lost support in 2016. The key determinant as to whether the trend of losing support was going to be what's happening in Nelson Mandela Bay, and in Nelson Mandela Bay, because elsewhere the movements are really marginal and ignorable. So if you look at Nelson Mandela Bay, the party, in fact, what's happened here is really very interesting, and it's cause for deeper analysis. There seems to be two things. The NNC has increased from about 41% in 2016 to about 46%. Okay. And while that has happened, the Democratic Alliance has been pushed back to the 30s. And that is quite interesting. So one, it doesn't know at this stage as to whether support which had gone to the Democratic Alliance has returned, or it's simply voters of the ANC in its strongholds who had stayed away now came out in droves to vote for the party. It's still something we're going to we'll analyze further. But what it does is, at least the changes at a national level have been able to galvanize support base which was sitting on the sidelines, and people are coming back again to say, let's give dawn, as it were, a renewed chance.
Interesting you speak about the DA. Let's speak about them for some time. For a long time, they were the key opposition in the Eastern Cape. I think they had hopes perhaps of even toppling the ANC in the Eastern Cape. But their numbers have dropped. And what do you think attests to this?
So the Democratic Alliance, this is what baffles me. With every election since 1999, they have been incrementally growing their support. What's happened now when you find that they are declining is very interesting. After having even, being the governing party in Nelson Mandela Bay, obviously that's not going to change because we're in a national election. But that trend is quite interesting. What's happening nationally is that a certain section of the DA support has moved towards a more conservative alternative, which is the Freedom Front Plus. Now, that's part of the story in Nelson Mandela Bay, because the margin that they have lost by doesn't tally with that explanation alone. Perhaps some of the support which had gone to them in the townships or elsewhere in the metro has gone back to the ANC. And then you've got newcomers also, that are eating up on that support. Among them, but I mean, Social Revolutionary Workers Party, though they've got some point-something percentage, they're not the type of party that's going to attract a DA supporter.
When you speak about new people on the block, we were speaking early on about the ATM, a newly formed party in the Eastern Cape. In their campaigning, they targeted really the rural areas. But you're saying earlier on that the church support perhaps contributed to their success. Currently, they're sitting on 1.46% of the votes. They've done well in the Eastern Cape for a newly formed party.
So what's happened to the South African voter is that they have become sensitive to some degree to morality. And so the rise of political parties that campaign on the platform of values and morals and Christian values seems to have gained. And I mean, I was also looking at Al Jamal in the Western Cape. They seem to be, slightly picking up. So those parties that are campaigning on faith-based platform seems to have done pretty well, even though the ACDP, is gaining slightly, but in some instances being overtaken by ATM, by the way. So I think there's something there. But they haven't gained traction in the urban part of the Eastern Cape. But I've noted that they've grown in the Eastern Cape. They've got some presence in Gauteng as well as Northwest and Free State. Even though in Northwest, with greater numbers now, they have dropped a little bit further than the top 7.
We spoke about the urban areas. Now let's just focus on the rural areas. Obviously, the Eastern Cape made up of large rural areas. For a long time, a party that was formed in the rural areas, such as the UDM, had quite a stronghold in the Eastern Cape. But we saw now with these elections, there's an area in Dabangulu ward, which was actually a UDM ward, but now it's being run by the ANC. So the UDM seems to be like on a downward spiral. What do you think attests to that? Perhaps people were saying on social media, and also some analysts were saying that perhaps the leader's indecisiveness or his emotive leading in terms of the issue with Mongameli Bobani a contributing factor to that as well.
My sense, Lerato, is that the UDM has consolidated a position in the political system as an important player and a defender of the rule of law. If you look at the style of the general, throughout his time from the Transkei, former Transkei, all the way to the presidency, he has dossiers have found a way to his hands, and he's made use of them. In his their launch of their manifesto, they spoke a lot about the court cases they have brought successfully against the government. I think while they've been successful in projecting themselves as defenders of the rule of law, they have failed to appeal to the hearts and minds of their own supporters, because there you don't need a pragmatic approach. You need to hamp on your ideology. so that you keep the hearts and minds, you keep the commitment. There's a saying, first seek the heart and then the hand. So I think that's where, for me, there was a loss of focus on the part of the UDM.
Well, that was political analyst Ongama Mtimka, just unpacking exactly how things are in the Eastern Cape. Obviously, the ANC leading right now, followed by the DA and the EFF. But for now, let's go back to you in studio.
Lorenzo, thank you very, very much for that comprehensive update coming from the Eastern Cape. So, from the Eastern Cape,